Tashdele, and welcome to the second annual English Virtual Forum, where we discuss and explore arrested history of Chushi Gangdruk. This forum provides an opportunity to delve into historical context and significance of Chushi Gangdruk's activities. It is also important to note that a separate virtual forum with Kewang Berigeshe Jimmy Wanjila will also take place on Thursday, June 15. Please ensure that you tune in to the Tibetan Virtual Forum. My name is Sonam Wangjal, and I'm a General Secretary of Canada Dhokham Chushi Gangdruk. And today I am super thrilled to introduce one of my favorite MPs, Lhajari Namji Dogala, who will be my guest on the virtual forum. And a bit of a snippet regarding Namjula is that she's been a remarkable and a thoughtful leader who's known for her no-nonsense approach. MP Lhajarila Namje Dogala has significantly contributed to the Tibetan community, demonstrating her dedication and commitment to their welfare. Her progressive leadership and thoughtful decision-making have earned her admiration and respect throughout the Tibetan community in diaspora and also globally. Namje Dogal Hajarila is currently a Tibetan parliamentarian who's obtained her Master's of Arts degree in English Literature in 2012. After completing her studies, she took the lead in the legal empowerment project under the Tibetan Women's Association, subsequently served as the vice president from October 2013 to September 2016, and later became the president of Guchusum, an association of former Tibetan political prisoners based in Dharamsala from October 2016 to December 2019. Currently, MP Lhajarila holds the position of the vice president in the Free Indo-Pacific Alliance, a coalition composed of members of Tibet, Southern Mongolia, Uyghurs, Taiwan, Hong Kong, and other regions. In her role as a parliament member of the exiled Tibetan government, she has actively worked for the welfare of the Tibetan community. She has visited numerous settlements, actively engaging with the community to understand and address their problems. Ms. Lhajarila has utilized her platform as a parliamentarian and as an individual to advocate for the Tibetan cause. MP Lhajarila also participated in organized and represented Tibet and Tibetan cause and struggle in various international conferences and platforms, meetings, and protests, raising awareness about the Tibet issue on the local and international platforms. She's been a prominent figure in the major national and international media outlets, serving as representative of Tibet and amplifying Tibetan voices. With progressive, thoughtful, gritty leadership values that MP Lhajarila manifests and upholds, I am confident that the Tibetan cause will gain momentum and ultimately lead to Rangzin, which is the core of our struggle. It is through the collective efforts of such leaders that the aspirations and the rights of Tibetans can be advanced, realized, and most importantly, transcended. Welcome, MP Lhajarila. Thank you for taking the time out from your busy schedule and making the time for this forum. How are you, Namjula?
I'm good.
That's
Thank you for
great.
having me, Sana.
Sounds good. Sounds good. So without further ado, let's dive into the topic and why we are here. Again, Namjula, from your perspective, from your experience, from all the conversations that you have had with the political prisoners as the president of Guchusum, you've been exposed to various thought process, the cultures, the aspirations of exiled Tibetans and Tibetans coming directly from Tibet. So from that perspective, can you please provide a brief synopsis in terms of the arrested history of Chushi Gangdruk and the struggle that the association carried forward during the helm of the Chinese Communist Party coming from the eastern region and penetrating towards the central Tibet. What are your thought process, and how do you look at the Chushi Gangdruk Association back in 1949 up until 1960s, where actually the whole association was dissolved? So what's your perspective on it?
Well, Shamla, without a doubt, the Tibetan freedom movement has reached the third or fourth generation since the Chinese occupation, forced occupation of Tibet. And Tibetans, since the invasion, had challenged the Chinese Communist Party and the so-called People's Liberation Army in various means. Today is a day when we are endorsing and we are strongly advocating for a non-violent, active resistance against Chinese Communist Party. But when we started off the Tibetan freedom movement, when it came to the forced occupation of Tibet, the Tibetans inside Tibet attempted every possible means in making sure that they're able to protect Tibet, they're able to protect political leader, His Holiness the 14th Dalai Lama, and make sure that the Tibetan people are protected in that process. So I would say that because of that reason, Chushi Kangdruk, the Tibetan Resistance Army, plays a pivotal role, especially for the fact that the Tibetan movement started off against Chinese Communist Party with the important role that Chushi Kangdruk had played. So I believe that every protest, every activism matters, and it's 2023 right now. But how we started off is something that the not just Tibet supporters, but the Tibetans, the new generations, have to know and understand. And we must remember the contributions, the sacrifices, literally, have been made to ensure that Tibet could be safeguarded from the foreign occupation. So I must take the opportunity to remember the martyrs from Chushi Kangdruk who have died protecting Tibet, died ensuring that His Holiness the 14th Dalai Lama is escorted safely to India, and to make sure that the Tibetans are safer. We know that we ended up losing the battle, but having said that, it's important to acknowledge the sacrifices that have been made by this Tibetan Resistance Army, and it was that particular reason why my forefathers, Chushi Kangdruk, so that is the reason why I'm so proud of the sacrifices that my Pala and his families have made back in Tibet by making sure that is offered the assistance that they deserve. Today, actually not today, after 3 days, is a day 65th day when we remember the martyrs.
And perhaps Namjala's network connection isn't that great. Nevertheless, what I'm hearing from you, Namjala, is that there's so many components of the struggle that occurred in the face or in the name of Chushi Gangdruk, which is a resistant military movement against the usurpers, against the Chinese Communist parties. And I would love to double click on how your family played a role. And I'm going to continue to lead the story at that stage. So thank you very much for explaining why it matters, especially for the younger generation. And it is so important to create that awareness. It is so important for us to connect with some of the grassroots protests actually that occurred back in Tibet from 1949 to early 50s to actually towards the end of 50s when His Holiness came to India or what have you. There was a big story. There was a big struggle that is not very widely shared. And I think through these forums, the attempt is to create awareness, especially with the younger youth, to double click and understand and continue to strive and take our movement forward, right? So thank you very much for talking about that. And I really relate to these stories because when I grew up in India and during my sort of early childhood education in Indian schools or what have you, there was so much focuses on the freedom movement, the martyrs, the patriots, Subhash Chandra Bose to Chandrasekhar Azad
Right.
Bhagat Singh, and it is so important for us to understand, learn, and connect with that history. And I think for us, many of the Tibetans, I think that Chushi Gangdruk history is the one that sort of we all should be proud of, saying that, okay, against all the odds, we have brave men and women who stood up against the mighty communist China with very limited resources, who never gave up. And I think that is the aspiration, and that is the emotion that we need to sort of carry forward, to never give up, to continue to,
Yes.
to manifest kind of the David and Goliath thing, and pushing forward all the time. So thank you very much for that.
Right.
So my second set of questions, and again, I don't want to put you on the spot, but I wanted to ask, were there any prominent leaders in Chushi Gangdruk that you sort of look up to, and you're like, oh my God, like, wow, what a leader? Because even though there was so many adversities, there was so many challenges, or what have you, do you have any heroes, or do you want to talk a little bit about any personalities and create that awareness within the youth?
Oh, well, it's not the politician in me speaking. So I would say that honestly, from the Chushi Gangdruk resistance army, I have always wondered how each one of them have made a significant role into how, when we're talking about Chushi Gangdruk, we talk about certain leaders, how brave they were, how heroic they were, which is absolutely true. And, they have achieved so much. But that achievement would not have happened without support of each one of the army, who's made a marvelous commitment towards making sure that we reach the goal that we wanted. Even though we haven't had the victory, we know that they were able to achieve the kind of determination, the courage that was expected out of them. So for me, honestly speaking, I would not choose one individual. There's so many of them who have done some marvelous job. And honestly speaking, I've always wondered about those brave women who have made so much contribution in the Chushi Gangdruk Tibetan resistance movement, where we hardly get to hear much about them. When we are talking about Chushi Gangdruk, this assumption that those are just some brave men, but we know that when it comes to courage, it involves lots of fear. But despite fear, how do we challenge is something that we must appreciate. And having said that, we must speak about those unsung heroes who are unknown of, who are unspoken of, who were there supporting, assisting those important leaders, including, I've wondered about those women who supported them within their families, and those horses who were out there making sure that the war happens, something that is not spoken of. And how the assumption that when it comes to Tibetan resistance army, Chushi Gangdruk, that these are the Khampa warriors. I believe that those Khampa warriors came out as Tibetans, as proud Tibetans. And this is what we have seen, where they were Amdoas who came out as proud Tibetans. They were Uzan Tibetans in Chushi Gangdruk who came out as proud Tibetans. So for me, that image, that courage, that determination is a heroic deed for me. And this is what I look up to. Instead of one individual, their emotion and their sacrifice and the pride in them, and the lack of fear in terms of I might lose everything today, but I'm doing it for my country, to protect Tibet, to protect the Tibetans, to protect our leader. This is emotion that I crave for, and this is what I want the Tibetan younger generation to know, and that, those are that emotion is something that could be missing right now, and this is what we need. And from these individuals, not just the known faces, not just the important figures, but those who participated, each one of them, and their stories are those remarkable, inspiring stories that we need at the moment, that we need to focus on, because there's so much that I don't know of, honestly. Apart from the fact that my late Pala and my Agulad, deliberately chose to come out and support and provide whatever we could as Lhageri family by allowing Chushi Khan to use Lhageri Palace as the new battalion. So I think those are something that our family found significant as Tibetans. So I think those, that story of sacrifice is something that I find marvelous, and that is what heroism for me is, and that is what I look up to.
Well, that's a very interesting angle. That's a very interesting angle. And that's why I think a women leadership truly and holistically understands the totality of the struggle. To your point, there were many, many fearless women. And not only that, the emotional support, mother losing her son, a wife losing a husband, a daughter losing a father, and all of those conditions created by this amazing women going through so much of hardship is absolutely remarkable, to your point. So thank you very much for sharing that. Okay, so now segueing into the core of today's virtual agenda, today's virtual conversation, is to always portray that the Chushi Gangdruk resistance movement is a manifestation of all the three provinces, and it is a story of every Tibetan. And it is so important to sort of emphasize, amplify, because when I was, as I said, when I was growing up in Indian school, no one said, "Oh, Bhagat Singh was from Punjab," so you know what I mean. Or no one
Yes.
said Subhash Chandra Bose was from Bengal, and then there was this narrative, obviously promoted and propagated by many Indian intellectuals who thought to unify this, we have to make sure that the story has to be Indian. And from a Chushi Gangdruk resistant perspective, also to unify all the Tibetans, it is a Tibetan story. And thank you very much for sharing that. Okay, now I'm coming to the core of this virtual conversation, and we're going to stay a bit longer. We'll do a little bit of deeper dive into this particular segment of the conversation. So to give all of you, especially the younger generation, a bit of a perspective, is that when the Chinese Communist Party was invading Tibet, and obviously the Chinese Communist Party and China resides towards the east sides of the Tibet. So geographically, they would cross the two provinces, which is Amdo and Kham. So as they were in that process of getting into Tibet and moving into the central Tibet, you need to understand some of the perspectives in terms of the eastern provinces, because they really got the brunt of it, right? And as these events were unfolding from 1949 to late 50s, when then you see the true color of the Chinese Communist Party, because until then they were playing very nice, right? And that's their style. And they continue to do that in nowadays too. And so we have to be very careful in terms of what do we learn from the history. So in mid 50s or late 50s, the Chinese Communist Party and the PLA and Mao Zedong's regime started showing their true color. And I think that is when the entirety of the Tibetan population and the three provinces got together to truly resist against this communist regime. Um, Nevertheless, I also want to be brutally honest here that the central Tibet and the government and many of the Kudas who were part of the administration were very, very overwhelmed, very, very pressured by this mighty Chinese force. And there was a lot of conflict happening during 56, 57, 58, 59. Um, During that time, when the Chushi army was sort of gathering their forces and coming towards the central Tibet because they were losing grounds in the eastern, and they were connecting with the leaders in the central Tibet, especially in Lhasa, um, due to overpowering, overwhelming pressure from the Chinese soldiers, Chinese communist government, or what have you. 90% of the Tibetan authoritative figures really couldn't do much to help the movement. But it was very fascinating as I was unpacking, as I was diving into it, and as I was having solitary conversations with many other individuals who were aware of these unique stories. But I think it's so important for us to amplify these stories in the masses. So through all of the circumstances, 90% of the authoritative figure in Lhasa or what have you had to cave in because of the pressure. There was one family, or maybe a couple of families, but very, very small percentage. And your ancestors, Namjala, stood up to the grounds. They really didn't care about your real estate, your assets, the economy that many of the leaders in Lhasa had going, and Chinese Communist Party were incentivizing these many authoritative figures by giving them whatever they wanted as long as they would heed and listen to the Chinese direction and their directives and their agendas. But your ancestors stood up against all the odds, ready to sacrifice the family legacy, the asset, and helping the resistance movement of Chushi Gangdruk, where they really didn't have a place to go because everything was cornered. And even the 90% of the population in Lhasa, around Lhasa, because of the Communist Party, they really didn't have any places to maneuver. But your ancestors, your great grandfathers, your family members back in Lhasa, gave them refuge in your compounds, fed them, gave them direction. And I apparently, and I'll let you tell the stories, many of your family members, actually your uncles, and we'll show a couple of pictures that we have, joined the resistance movement. That to me is fascinating. Now, I'm not downsizing that, a Tibetan who has aspirations would fight back, and that is amazing. Versus, a institution, someone who has so much to lose would actually sacrifice all of that wealth, all of that assets, all of that sort of a authoritative figure or what have you, to actually be true to the cause, to understand who the enemy is or was, and stand ground, and in that sort of a situation lose everything that you have built, in generations. So that to me is a very compelling story, and I've never heard it, but I heard it very recently, and therefore I wanted to connect with you and talk about it to create that awareness. So tell me a little bit about that, and we'll spend the bulk of the time on this sort of a segment, and then we'll sort of move towards other questions.
Oh, well, Snamla, I would say that this is part of a section of the Tibetan, I would say, Lhagari's history that I'm very proud of, because I've known And that history is a testament that, not just like a family, our predecessors have always realized our responsibility towards the nation and the people. And that had always been something that was so significant for each one of them, and something that I've grown up hearing repeatedly by my late Pala. And he would talk about how it was a very difficult time for Tibet when Chinese PLA armies, the so-called People's Liberation Army, had come in Tibet over the decades, and from 49 to 59 have come in Tibet, was gradually taking over the entire Tibet. In fact, entered Lhasa, the capital city, as well. And they've started to become a big threat to the safety of the Tibetan government, the free government that time, Gandhi, and of course the safety of His Holiness the 14th Dalai Lama. So that time, so much was happening when it comes to the leadership, the kind of I would say the relation, the very sort of emotion and questions that so many of them had, and how they judged the Chinese Communist Party's occupation, and they were trying to look for solution. And it was during that time when my late Pala and his family members realized the importance and the significance and actually the role that Chushi Khandro played and what it could possibly play, and how it was so crucial that they would be guaranteed the assistance they needed to survive, literally. So they were ready to put their lives on threat. However, what they needed was beyond that. What they needed were not just the courage and the readiness to sacrifice themselves to protect Tibet and His Holiness the 14th Dalai Lama. What they needed was so much beyond that. So my late father and the family decided that we could be ones, of because Chushi Khandro didn't have a proper base that time, army base that time, and it was around that time when our family decided that they should be guaranteed a support. It was only possible if they shifted to Lhageri Palace and turning that into the main base for Chushi Khandro. And having said that, I do want to acknowledge the contributions and the direct contribution that my late Agula, who recently passed away, Sejong Nyata made by literally coming out and supporting Chushi Khandro, not just supporting, but making sure that he was able to guarantee and recruit young, strong Tibetans from El Hageri to come and join him. So not just Hageri teaching facilitate Chushi Khandro in terms of turning Al-Hageri Palace into a base and providing food and basic needs to Chushi Khandro, apart from the guns and everything, whatever that we owned. It was our people also. Agula literally came out and chose to head one of the battalion, and Agula was joined by other El Hageri's masses, some of whom have ended up coming through exile in 59 along with Agula, and some of them still reside around India, and many of them have passed away, but their children are still around, and we remain in utter awe and respect for whatever they have done. So I think it's important to acknowledge not just the contribution that our family has made, but how the people of El Hageri joined into, they're called EPA. So how they joined into assisting Chushi Khandro. So the kind of rumors and the image that was created of Chushi Khandro as, so many names, whether they were called bandits and everything because of some mischievous behavior of some section of Chushi Khandro, we understood what the relevance of importance of Chushi Khandro was. So I would say that, we had to pay a big price for that. As you said, the real estate, everything was later bombarded. Everything was, destroyed by Chinese Communist Party, the palace and everything. Not just that, our entire family, apart from Awunyandala, who ended up coming to exile, they were all imprisoned for more than 20 years because of our involvement and, as they said, the counter-revolutionary activity was the accusation that was put on our family. So those are some of the contributions that we were able to make for Chushukandu, hence for the Tibetan freedom movement. So I have always said that, whether it's real estate, whether it's power, those can be made again, those can be renewed again. But an opportunity to sacrifice yourself, your everything for your nation, for your people, is something that not everybody gets. And I'm
Right.
so proud of what our family decided to do and what Pala decided to do, because it was that time when there were so many who were uncomfortable about Fuchikando and the price that we had to pay, as you see on screen. Those are some of the some section of Taikiri Potan that was entirely destroyed, due to involvement and support of Chushikando. So those were the direct impact upon the family, but I would say direct contribution by the family to the Tibetan freedom movement. So yes, there were so many stories that could be shared, so many anecdotes that my late Agula shared of how, as they decided to depart towards India, the challenges that they faced along the way, where whatever they had carried, they had to literally leave it because their lives were so much important for them. There were times when they doubted if they'll be able to, along with other Chushikanto, safely reach India after His Holiness reached India. So though there were so many instances where our late Agula had to overcome, along with the other epas who had joined Chushikanto. So I would say that I'm not sure if I can call it heroic, because I'm talking about my family, but I would certainly say that, those were some sacrifices that they made. And some of those are something that nobody knew of, nobody knows of, perhaps remain indifferent about. So I think those are something that perhaps the younger generation also, not just younger generation, but the general public of Tibet ought to know, because this is exactly the accusation that Chinese Communist Party has accused against our family for counter-revolutionary act, so-called. So yes, I'm not sure how much more do I need to add in, but those are some very interesting, instances that I've ended up hearing while growing up, apart from the experiences of my late Bala and my Agulas in Chinese prison.
Mm.
So, yeah.
Thank you, Namjula, for sharing that. And you know, having lived in India in exile and continue to sort of live in the Tibetan community here in Toronto, and accumulating some of the experience in terms of how do you view things, how do you value things. I think as the saying goes, action speaks louder than words. Some of the actions that your family manifested is truly, truly like hands down appreciated by many, many of of the Chushi sort of a community that we have, and we're trying to uphold the legacy and the history. And if we don't do that, then who will? And through that sort of upkeeping, it is so important to sort of double click, take a deeper dive into many of the untold stories, many of the arrested history, like your family's involvement with Chushi Gandru. And and again, I'm emphasizing on this very fact because I think that is the defining factor, is that there was so much to lose for doing the right thing, right? And choosing the right path and the difficult path, because that was the truth. And losing everything in that process is absolutely admirable. So from all of the Tibetan in diaspora or globally, we are very, very thankful to your family, to your ancestors, and it is not easy, because there have been majority of instances where if you had done everything that the communist Chinese wanted at that point in time, with so much of heavy-handedness, so much of pressure, it would have been, maybe it would have been a happy path, but your family chose not to do it. And from those events, they had to succumb to many atrocities. As you indicated, they had to go to the prison, and they had to lose everything, all the comfort and all of the support and the authoritative and the assets or what have you. So to me, that is very compelling because that sets things very differently when you analyze it. And as I said again, to be a part of the Chushi Gangdruk obviously is a very proud moment for many of the Tibetans who participated, because it was a David and Goliath story. But through that story, I think there are many other factors, like your family involvement, where you had to lose everything. So on this platform, on behalf of Canada Dhokham Chushi Association, and I'm pretty sure that I echo many other organizations around Tibet, Tibetan diaspora. We truly appreciate your family's sacrifices, and we hope, and I truly hope, that you will continue to build on that legacy, that you will not cave in, that you will do the right thing, and you will follow the right path because of all the sacrifices, personal sacrifices that you had to endure. And we're very, very thankful for that. So thank you, Angela. Okay.
Yeah, I think my Pala was just performing his responsibility as a Tibetan. So I doubt if he needed gratitude from anyone. I would say that I remain proud of my Pala and my Aula and everyone because of the fact that they chose their responsibility over their comfort. This is what the nation called for that time. So it was they performed their responsibility, they performed their duty. So yes, I think this is something that the future generations will remember. At least the future generation of Hagere will remember this and will remain proud of the fact. And I have always been reminded by my late Pala that one needs courage to speak out the truth, to stand up for truth, even if it calls for losing what you have, whether it's power or fame or your what do you say, the asset, whatever. So everything else is way behind your responsibility and your integrity. So yes, our integrity called for sacrifice, and this is what they did. So yes, I'm very proud of them.
You should be. You absolutely should be. Okay, so thank you very much for again sharing a segment of history in detail that we've never heard, and I hope that we will continue to raise awareness, because I'm also a believer that many of the compelling story that adds value needs to be told over and over and over again, and I'm hoping that in days to come, in future, we'll continue to sort of bring these stories up to the surface and ensure that the general masses are able to consume these stories that will instigate and inspire the younger youth to do the right thing and pave the right future for the Tibetan struggle. So thank you very much for sharing that. Okay, so as we sort of go to the second segment, and sort of wrap up the virtual forum. Couple of closing notes here. So you have been exposed to a very hybrid Tibetan population, in a sense that you grew up in exile, you are in the parliament sessions here in Tibetan diaspora, you have worked with NGOs that exposed you to many of the international communities, and most importantly, and to me, that's my personal experience, when we work at a very close proximity with the Tibetans who actually come from Tibet, and the passion and the emotion that they bring along, and being able to absorb that. So summarizing all the experiences that you've had so far, and I know that there will be many more experiences you will have in days to come. Um, what is your call to action to all of the Tibetans, to all the younger generation uh, in India, globally, in terms of how we should view Chushi Gangdruk's resistant movement and how we should put that as a foundation to sort of look up and say, okay, what can we do to ensure that we're doing the right thing? That's one question. Second question is, what is your message um, to all of the Tibetans, all of the Tibetan supporters out in the world in terms of how do we need to make the right moves forward, and how do we need to um, inclusively diversity be united and have one call to action. So what are your thoughts on that, Namjula? I think you're virtual. Yeah.
I'm sorry, I think I could only hear the second question that you raised. I could not hear the
Yes.
first one.
Yes. I'll repeat that. So the first question is about understanding Chushi Gangdruk's resistant history, right? And summarizing that history, how we should sort of look out in the future, and what is your advice to the younger youth, keeping that as a foundation to say, okay, how do we strive forward? How do we struggle forward? You know, there are many conversations, right? We get to hear in today's world in terms of making concessions and caving in or what have you. What lessons have we learned from our history? Um, that's one question, and the second question, I think you heard it, right?
I would say that the responsibility that we have as the newer generation and the world would be to, first of all, really know our history. You know, I think whether it comes to our education system in exile, this is what is the missing piece, the missing part of jigsaw that is happening. Even when it comes to studying the real history of Tibet, we are looking at the kind of history which seems to be uh, more fable in the way where we're talking about our great kings as uh, some lamas or somebody who's come down from the heaven, instead of looking at them and looking at studying what from our history. So this is what has been taught to us in exile, to us as well. So I think it's important that we really revisit it as Tibetan community, so that we know our real contemporary history, particularly of the Tibetan freedom movement vis-a-vis Chinese Communist Party. So we need to know the real history without glorifying anything, the actual history that has happened and the actual contribution that has been made, and those individuals who's made the contributions. So we should know them, because I think, when it comes to Tibetan freedom movement or any movement around the world, people find inspiration to move forward as democratic nations by understanding your history, especially understanding and recognizing the revolutionary, the actors, the real actors behind, the independence of a nation. So if we ought to move towards right direction, we must know our history, first of all, and we must speak a real history, So when it comes to fighting the Chinese Communist Party, Tibetans, each one of them came out as Tibetans. So this is one thing that we must remember. It was never about Khampa or Amdo or Uzang. It was about we, the Tibetan people, against the Chinese Communist Party and its leadership. Was the message that was sent from the first day. It was about us living and regaining, restoring our Tibetan freedom and fighting for the independence of Tibet was the call. Making sure that His Holiness the 14th Dalai Lama, our then political leader, is safe was the message that we wanted, was the endeavor of the Tibetan freedom movement resistance. So I think those are the messages, the slogans that we must not forget. And we must, in our attempt to send out a message of Tibetan freedom movement that is walking towards a non-violent active resistance, we must not, hide these brave stories of Tibetans under carpet. Uh, because this is what exactly Chinese Communist Party is doing, but by accusing these martyrs as decoys and whatnot. So it's important that we recognize them for who they are, the contributions that they've made. If we can't find, if we succumbed ourselves to the propaganda, the propaganda of Chinese Communist Party, we will never be able to find a true future for Tibet. So this is, I think, one thing that is so crucial, since we are talking about, talking on this important day. So this is something that we must remember, that we must work upon. So which means that it's not just individual responsibility, but the responsibility of the exiled government and the educational institutions in exile to start that. Because if we can't do it, we can't expect the Tibetans inside Tibet to know the real history, or at least discuss the real history. Leave aside, informing the world about it. There's so many Tibet supporters who do not know that section of our story. So what about them? It won't be fair at all if we just leave that section inside. What about those people who have died protecting Tibet, who have died making sure that they're able to escort His Holiness the 14th Dalai Lama safely to India? So we must speak about them. We must know them. So that begins from me as well. So there are so many individuals that I need to know about and stay inspired from. So yes, this is what I think is important to begin with. And about the Tibet supporters or those individuals, I would say that Tibetans on our part had done everything. We say it that way. So it's not just about protecting Tibetan Buddhism, but protecting the civil and political rights of Tibetans, about independence of Tibet. I think those are the point that matters to Tibetans. So we know that the support of the international community, governments around the world is so crucial. But more than that, what I find so important is action of the Tibetans ourselves, because we are the leaders of this movement. What we need are more cheerleaders, more people who will support and push and encourage us. But it's so crucial that we as Tibetans do not forget our history, but fight for our future as well. Because if we lose that, if we lose that determination and grit and that resilience, again, it won't be fair for each lives that have been lost. So I would say that let's remember that, and let's keep that as our focal point, so that we move forward with truth on our side. And yes, for the Tibet supporters, I would say that do stand on, do the right thing, because there's so many individuals who are speaking about human rights, about freedom around the world. Yet, when it comes to China's Communist Party, they seem to cow down and only think about their own personal benefit. But the reality is that there is no way anyone can and should trust China's Communist Party, because Tibetans have done that. We have signed the 17 peace point agreement, even though it's under duress. We have signed that. We know what has happened after you sign any agreement with them. This is something that the message that I always send to India, that there is no point coming up with any bilateral agreements with China. I would say the same thing to America. I would say the same thing to Canada, European countries, Australia, everyone, that, let's not just fool ourselves. We must recognize the true face of China's Communist Party, and fighting Tibet and the Tibetans as a true allies is the only way that they can actually beat the demon that will only lead to true destruction of the world. And I'm not here trying to scare or trying to intimidate the people. This is the reality that Tibetans have gone through and we continue to go through. So if the world wants peace, truth to win, and basic human rights to be ensured to every human being, including Chinese themselves, then it's important that we defeat the Chinese Communist Party and at least speak out the truth and stand with the Tibetans. So this is all I would say, that well, it's high time that we speak the truth. Otherwise, the story won't end. The freedom movement won't end just with the Tibetans, but so many of nations who are already facing the hegemony of the Chinese Communist Party, which is spreading across the world.
So true, so true. And I love the fact that you indicated that the Tibetans should lead. It is our struggle, it is our movement. We understand the pain points. And yes, we need allies. Yes, we need cheerleaders, and we welcome them. But I think to your point, we need to look back in our history. We need to learn from our history, and we need to take those emotions that has transpired through our history and sort of move it forward. And if the Tibetan becomes like inches, and we always sort of look at things at a periphery, at a surface level, then I think that's going to definitely be very dangerous for our struggle. And that's why I think it is so important for us to retell the stories and the history that truly ignites our emotion as human beings. And these are the stories, of Chushi Gangdruk. These are the stories of selfless, Hajari sort of a community who, under so much pressure, gave everything up and did the right thing and stood against the Communist Chinese Party. And that has to be the core of who we all are. And once we start losing the core, once we start losing the fire in our belly, I think it's going to be game over. So I think it is so important for us and the younger generation to connect to these stories, do research, read books, and uncover that. And I think once we start igniting that hidden passion, I think something magical will definitely happen. And to Namjala's point, our job, and it's my job, a bit older, job is to sort of create that platform, connect with the younger youth, and always find spaces to retell our stories. So having said that, any last thoughts, Namjala, before we wrap up this virtual session?
All I would say is I take the opportunity to remember the martyrs of Chushi Gangdruk today, and I hope that the prayers, that the dream that they had will be realized soon, which means to see an independent Tibet, to see His Holiness the 14th Dalai Lama back in Tibet, in Potala, where he is ought to be. So this is what we want. And upon the dreams that they've had, what we have learned is how the future for Tibet should be nothing but a free and democratic Tibet. And this is the vision that we hold for Tibet. And no nation has the right, including Chinese Communist Party, to change the history of Tibet and declare Tibet as part of China, and manipulate the history of Tibet. And it's completely unethical and hysterical that this is something that they would do. Hence, what I would say is allow us, the Tibetans, to decide what we want to do for our future and our country. So what we want, what we call for is very clear. It's a free and democratic Tibet.
That's great. That's great. And as you indicated and alluded to this week is the Chushi Gangdruk's founding week. June 16th is going to be the 65th anniversary of the formation of Chushi Gangdruk that represented the entirety of the Tibet. And it is a struggle that we need to continue to amplify and retell, especially to our younger generations. And the aspirations of the fighters and the martyrs and the folks who participated in this movement truly understood. They said, if you don't address the root cause, you cannot negotiate. And there is no point to negotiate. So you must address the root cause, which is to drive the Chinese illegal occupation away from Tibet and aspire for a complete independence. That's going to address all of the concerns and all of the issues. So I think that is something that we, as Chushi Gangdruk Association, aspire for, and we continue to tell our story. And like I said, and I'm going to repeat it again, Namjula, as progressive as you are, as thoughtful as you have been, and as gritty leadership that you've manifested again on this virtual call, I think I'm very confident that future leaders like yourself, who believes in the core foundation in terms of how do we achieve and realize that true success, is absolutely will lead to our, will lead our movement to ultimate state and transcend many of the activities that we have been doing in the past in diaspora. So we wish you all the luck. We wish you continue to strive forward, and we are rooting for you. And if there's anything that we can do, please let us know. So thank you very much on behalf of Canada Dhokham Chushi Gangdruk for attending this virtual forum. For all the audience here in Canada, on June 17th, there's going to be an event at the Lakeshore, Toronto, where we're going to be celebrating the 65th founding day. And we have a very special guest who is a Tibetan MP, and he will be attending our forum, and also a Canadian MP, James Maloney, will be attending our forum. So looking forward to that. So without further ado, Namjula, thank you very much for your time, and take care. Cheers.
Wish you all the best for the event.
Thank you. Take care. Bye. Oh. Goa, 지가 하고 싶다는 맛이든.